Throughout the many long years of my time here in Rivendell, I have yet to be in so pleasant a company as that of the Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins. He was my dear friend, and we would often talk long into the hours of the night, discussing the ancient songs and the tales of the free peoples of the wider world. We would walk the passages of the great library and the halls of lore, seeking out the scrolls of ancient tomes that had been so meticulously maintained and preserved by the Lord Elrond and his kin. But now, long after he took the ship with Frodo and Gandalf across the sea, I retain this tradition and pass my knowledge on to you, until my own time comes to take the straight road into the west, to the blessed shores of Valinor. But before that time comes, I will tell you of my dear friend, Bilbo. In the twilight years of Middle-earth, when the weight of the ring had passed from Bilbo to Frodo, the old hobbit found himself wandering paths long separated from the tumultuous shadow of his adventures. It is said among us, the elves of Rivendell, that Bilbo's life after he parted with the ring was a bittersweet, winding road. A story that we have come to tell with both fondness and sorrow. For he was beloved by many, and in his twilight years, he grew very dear to our hearts. When Bilbo first arrived in Rivendell, the echoes of his past still clung to him. The ring had only recently been surrendered, passed to Frodo in a moment of great reluctance, and yet in his heart, great relief. That parting was not without pain, an ache deeper than any physical wound. For many long years, the ring had been his companion, his burden and his secret. Yet for all its allure, it had also been a chain, slowly wearing down the very spirit of the old hobbit. We, the firstborn, could sense the subtle change in him when at last he was free of it. It was as if a great burden had been lifted, and yet he was left a little diminished, as if a part of his vitality had slipped away with the golden band. But in the days following his arrival at Imladris, Bilbo found comfort among us. The beauty of Rivendell, the wisdom of Elrond, and the songs of the waters in the valley seemed to restore a peace to his heart that he had not known since his long journey to the lonely mountain. He would spend many hours with the learned among us, speaking of the ancient days and asking questions of our lore. His curiosity never waned, and in those early years his mind was still sharp, though time had left its mark upon his body. But as the years drifted, the old hobbit began to feel the weight of his years more heavily. The weariness of age, long delayed by the power of the ring's unnatural influence, crept up upon him. His hands, once steady with pen and parchment, began to tremble, and his eyes, which had once keenly observed the world, began to grow dim. Yet Bilbo's spirit remained resilient, and he took to his writing with a renewed fervour, eager to finish the work he had started, his account of his journey and all the wonders he had seen. He often shared his stories with us, sitting on the benches within the Hall of Fire, his voice soft but full of warmth as he recounted his travels with Thorin Oakenshield and the company of dwarfs. His face would light up with the memory of old friends, of the dragon Smaug and the treasures of Erebor. But always, at the edges of these tales there was a shadow. Most notably his encounter with the ring beneath the misty mountains, with Gollum, that strange and pitiable creature. In his later years, Bilbo came to speak of the ring less often, for even in its absence, it haunted him. Perhaps in some corner of his mind, he knew what burden had truly passed to Frodo. It was a sadness we could feel within him, even as he sought to hide it with light words and songs. For though Bilbo was far from the Shire, his thoughts often wandered back to it. He missed the rolling hills and the green pastures, the smell of fresh tilled earth and the quiet comforts of Bag End. He would often ask Lord Elrond for news of his kin, of Frodo and of Samwise, and even Merry and Pippin. The thought of them brought him solace, though it also stirred an unease that he could not quite shake. He feared for Frodo, not because he doubted his courage, but because he knew all too well the terrible pull of the One Ring. Bilbo's years in Rivendell were gentle ones, but they were marked by a slow and restless fading. Time, that constant and indifferent force, began to wear away at him. His body grew frailer, and his once sharp wit softened with age. His heart remained ever bright, and his love for those he had left behind never diminished, for he spoke often of his desire to return to the Shire, to see his home one last time. But he knew in his heart that such a journey was beyond him. Rivendell had become his last refuge, and though he had never thought he would find himself so far from home, he came to accept it with grace. We who knew him during these years remember a certain wistfulness in his eyes. He had seen and done more than any other hobbit before him, but he had also given much to this. There was a peace in him, but also a longing, perhaps for the simpler days of his youth, or even perhaps for a world untouched by the darkness he had encountered. And yet, despite this, he did not regret the road he had taken. He had lived a life full of wonder and adventure, of friendship and loss, and in the end, he had chosen to step away from the lure of power, a choice that few mortals could have made. It was in the autumn of his life that the time came for Bilbo to leave Middle-earth. The ship to the Undying Lands was waiting, and with it the promise of rest beyond the circles of the world. When Gandalf came to him and told him that the time had come, Bilbo was ready. He had grown weary not only of the world, but of life itself. The journey across the sea to the lands of Valinor was a gift to him, and one that he accepted with gratitude. On that final day, when the ship sailed west from the Grey Havens, Bilbo stood beside Frodo, Gandalf, and the elves. He looked back on the shores of Middle-earth, not with sadness, but with a quiet acceptance. His time had come to an end, but his story would live on, in the songs and tales of the Shire, and in the hearts of those who loved him. The wind filled the sails, and the ship glided gracefully across the water, into the west, where the light of the Valar was there to greet him. Thus, my dear friend, Bilbo Baggins, the unlikely hero of two great adventures, passed beyond the reach of time and sorrow. His tale, like all tales worth telling, was not without its trials and pains, but it was filled with courage, kindness, and above all, the enduring spirit of a hobbit from Bag End. So it was that he found his peace far beyond the shadow of the ring, in a place where even the memory of its darkness could not follow. And so we remember him, with love and respect, the small hobbit who carried great things upon his shoulders, and who, in the end, laid them down and found rest.